this conference. I hope you're all well rested and ready to go for another day. Two very quick announcements, if I may. Firstly, that the cameras and maybe the video that you see here now and will be with us for the rest of the day are people from the two institutes making a visual-only record for the purpose of the two institutes. They are not, and I repeat not, members of the outside media, and the outside media will not be present through today's proceedings. The purpose of this is that I believe that during today's sessions we will be moving onto rather more substantial ground, and I think it will allow us to have in our discussions a lot of finer focus and indeed encourage the informal atmosphere that we are all seeking. The second point is, and I will come back to it at the end of the day, and that is that for the Prince of Wales reception this evening, this little address card, which should have your name on it, will be required to get in. So I do please ask that everyone should have one of these to avoid a delay at the gates of St James's Palace later this evening. And that is very much enough for me. It has given you 10 seconds to gather yourselves for today's experience, and I'm delighted to be able to hand over to this morning's chairman, Dr. Hamid Al-Mahdi.
Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. After a very long day yesterday, I believe the experience of yesterday has prepared ourselves for a very long day as well today. This morning, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce to you Sheikh Nazer, and he used to be a communication minister for a long time in Saudi Arabia and an oil minister. Today's topic is energy and security. I do believe this is a very important topic. The floor for you, sir.
Good morning, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Almost instantly, when the issue of security arises, the question of the identity of the adversary emerges as the most relevant component of the equation. Allow me to say at the outset that in our present world, where political, economic, and social insularity has been eroded by the attrition of distance, where time and space no longer handcuff human communication, and where the time-cherished concept of sovereignty is considered anachronistic in the international arena of politics, security must be redefined within the parameters of the new factors. It is time, therefore, to consider the fallacies surrounding the issue of energy security. The conventional wisdom has it that energy security relates first and foremost to that of the West, that is North America and Western Europe, with the rest of the world assuming second place. Not without reason. The West consumed in 1996 32 million barrels a day of refined products, or 48% of world consumption. Its whole modern civilization, economic growth, and military prowess are based on perpetual energy generation, of which oil would probably constitute 41% of energy consumption by the year 2000. The West has always been a producer of energy, including crude oil, but its domestic sources are either being depleted or unable to quench its consumptive appetite. Its current reserves are about 55 billion barrels, which at current consumption levels will be enough for just 5 years. The West is also a producer of alternate energy sources, which prove to be, or could prove to be, viable in the future. But until that actually materializes, and until alternate energy can supply economically all consumption sectors, it will have to rely on imports, more conspicuously from the Gulf. North America and Western Europe currently import almost 20 million barrels a day of oil, or 63% of its current consumption. It is also true that other areas in the world which may seem more accommodating to the West at the moment have satisfactory oil reserves. Latin America takes credit for about 138 billion barrels. Eastern Europe, including Russia, for about 60 billion barrels. And Africa for about 76 billion barrels. All countries in these areas are experiencing economic growth, which may increase domestic consumption and reduce exports. Yet a justifiable question arises immediately: what makes countries in those areas more reliable as oil suppliers than the Gulf countries? Each area has its own local and international political and economic problems, and security issues change with the change in circumstances. At the surface of it, therefore, it seems that the other side of the security equation has it all. Where we consider Iran as a member of the Gulf community, as we should, then the Gulf sits tightly on probably the vastest and most valuable resource in history. Put together, the Gulf owns over 670 billion barrels of reserves, or 84% of non-recoverable oil reserves. Some of those countries actually discover every year more than they have produced and exported to maintain seemingly undiminishing reserve levels. Not only that, when in the 70s exports were partially halted from the Gulf, oil prices quadrupled, causing serious hardships to the economies of many countries. The reason why the world was able to cope with the temporary cessation of exports from Iraq and Iran during their war was because other Gulf countries with available excess capacity were able to immediately fill the gap. Yet under current circumstances, any sizable reduction in export from the Gulf for a sustainable period of time would cause serious economic dislocation. Oil supplies are therefore very important for the West. In essence, that means that oil must continue to be explored for, developed, produced, refined, transported, and made available to consumers through commercial outlets at reasonable prices. Each of such generalities enumerated here has a specific definition in the mind of policymakers in the West. For example, the producing countries in the Gulf mostly carry out their own exploration for oil at the present time. The West would prefer that to be done through concession agreements in the spirit of the 20s and 30s, where consumers have the say and some control. They continue to pursue that objective under various titles. We should not be surprised if in the future some global scheme in the spirit of the environment is devised through the United Nations or some other international agency to secure access to resources that are vital for the world economy. It could materialize through the new corridors of globalism, free trade, or market democracy. I do not propose to get into that for the purposes of this discussion. Yet the fact remains that the figures I mentioned above are very unsettling for the West. We constantly hear a very unabashed statement that the security objective of Western countries in particular, and industrial countries in general, is to reduce dependence on foreign oil, specifically Gulf oil, or notwithstanding that, controlling it. They have energetically taken great strides in that direction. Let me mention a few of them. The West created the International Energy Agency as a dynamic answer to the oil crisis of the 70s. In 1996, the estimated commercial stocks on land ran around 2.4 billion barrels of oil, enough for 62 days of consumption for OECD countries at current levels. Strategic reserves are some 1.2 billion barrels of oil, enough for 30 days of consumption. Added up together, stocks and strategic reserves were about 3.6 billion barrels, which would carry the OECD countries for 92 days until any oil crisis is resolved. It has been reported recently that there is a remorselessly rising tide of crude stocks in OECD reporting countries. Total commercial stocks have increased in February 1998 over February 1997 by some 591,000 barrels a day. Total world stocks have increased for the same period by 648,000 barrels a day to reach 5.9 billion barrels. Additionally, a system of supply sharing is in place during an oil supply crisis, which would certainly alleviate some of the pressure on the members in case of supply disruption. No other country can withstand any impediments to its exports for a comparable period of time, especially with the dilution of their currency reserves. At their current expenditure levels, reserves would hardly be expected to return to their levels of the 70s and 80s. Furthermore, Gulf countries, whether friendly or unfriendly to the West, are aware of the aircraft carriers, cruise missiles, smart bombs close to their shores. They know that even a catastrophic event, such as the burning of oil wells as had happened in Kuwait during the Gulf War, may not be as disastrous as it was thought at first. Supplies were replaced more efficiently than it was thought possible, and the wells themselves were rehabilitated and put back into production in a remarkably short time. And when punishment is necessary, punishment is inflicted. There are currently 3 oil-producing countries. 2 of them are in the Gulf area under some form of international or individual sanctions. Both Iraq and Iran are unable to produce their quotas as approved by the United Nations or appropriated by OPEC due to the lack of equipment or technology. It has also been reported recently that deprived of oil recovery technology, Libya's major oil fields have witnessed plunging output over the last 5 years. Additionally, the falling income and the huge impact those sanctions have inflicted on the people of those countries are yet to be measured. We are now witnessing embargo in reverse by consumers on producers rather than by producers on consumers. The West also made great strides in reducing the cost of producing oil in Western fields, increased recovery ratios, and stretched the longevity of their reserves. Early expectations that North Sea oil fields would soon deplete not only have not materialized, but their production has increased from 2.1 million barrels a day in 1980 to 5.8 million barrels a day in 1998. 1986, surpassing all the oil producers in the Gulf, except Saudi Arabia. From the geopolitical point of view, oil is at the helm of the mountain. Cynics would reluctantly accept the reason for the Gulf War of 1990 to be altruistic, that it was fought to uphold the will of the international community, to protect national sovereignties and the rule of law. They do point to the fact that there was and there is still plenty of oil in the area of conflict which need to be protected. No conflict in modern times has created an alliance of such diverse countries and all adversaries had it not been for the paramount importance of the largest at stake. It is also true that another war was raging between Iraq and Iran, two major producing countries in the area, just preceding the Gulf War, with nobody making any attempt, individually or internationally, at the cessation of hostilities. In that particular instance, it was said that there was no imminent danger to oil supplies to the world market. In fact, a situation had existed, the like of which had never been experienced in the arena of human conflict. Both countries were not at the time on the top of the list of what you consider friends of the West. For most of the war, both countries were consuming each other while producing and exporting oil at the same time. Other countries in the area had enough capacity not only to supplant any production shortfalls by those countries, but also were spending huge sums on arms purchases from the West. And it was thought that when both countries would lose the stamina to continue the conflict and recognize their need for peace without foreign encouragement, both would need to rebuild and rehabilitate the destruction they wreaked on each other. Western companies and Western technology would be needed to implement the reconstruction. It is not too unrealistic, therefore, to construe from all this that the West has more time on its hand to feel secure about oil supplies until such time when alternate sources of supply are found and harnessed, or alternate energy sources are developed and made economically viable. In the meantime, policies are pursued diligently to reduce consumption at all levels. Two of such policies seem to be much more conspicuously pursued with measurable success. Let us talk about them briefly. The issue of domestic taxation on oil consumption has been a serious concern to all oil producers in the Gulf area. In 1996, the composite barrel of oil, which cost $20, see Italian ports, was sold in Italian markets for $114. Of that price, $77 were taxes. The average income per barrel for Gulf producers was no more than $20 a barrel in 1996, one of their best years in recent history. Not to mention that taxes on oil have more than doubled in Italy between 1986 and 1996, rising from $36 a barrel to $77 a barrel. The same could be said for almost all Western countries. In France, a composite barrel which was sold in French markets in 1996 for $120 comprised $83 in taxes. In Germany, over $105 per barrel sold, taxes reached $63. And in the United Kingdom, $69 were taxes in a price of $112. Consumer country governments in Western Europe maintained taxes on a barrel of oil almost 4 times as much as the countries which produce and transport that oil to them. Taxes reduce demand to the detriment of oil producers. In fact, no Western country endorses lower prices to recipients. Lower prices run the risk of higher taxes at the pump, an irony most Western consumers fail to recognize. My friend Dr. Rockman, OPEC Secretary General, estimated that in 1996, 4 major oil consumers, Japan, Germany, Canada, and the United States, received more income from their taxes on oil than the 11 OPEC member countries